to the committee, this isn't my district, but I'm concerned because I'm getting a lot of emails and phone calls. This was brought up, since it's a work session, was brought up last week about Councilman Kraft's district, and he couldn't be here tonight, and I need to talk to him. But it was up around the Haven Street in the industrial area they want to convert into residential. And I'm hoping that there's some, because we've been getting emails, all the council people on the committee and phone calls and meeting people on the streets, is I'd like to hear from the Maryland Port Administration, the Maryland Motor Truck, because that's a truck route. And I want to know what effect that's going to have on my district and even some of the other districts in the city of Baltimore. Is it just going to, is it just that one area that's going to be affected? And it's some questions and concerns that the committee has, and I've been asked to bring that out into the public. So is there anyone here from the Maryland Port Administration, the motor truck, industrial group, anyone can want to come up and
Good evening, Chairman Reisinger. My name is Jill Lemke. I'm here tonight representing the Maryland Port Administration.
Okay, the one question I have is basically, if this passes to where it goes residential, what effect is that going to have, like in my district? Even though we have the Mizot around Curtis Avenue and some other industrial, I got a number of industrial parks in my district. What effect would that have, if any?
The truck routes and the rail lines that run through this area of Haven Street service the whole region, including other parts of the city. These are the only rail lines that lead to the port terminals at Seagirt Marine Terminal and Dundalk Marine Terminal, which is where a bulk of where our general cargo comes from. In terms of impact, it would impact any other industrial concerns that either ship by rail or by truck and utilize both the resources available at the Port of Baltimore and at other related industries along the rail line. So there are some synergies between various companies. So not everything is going to go on rail. Some of it's going to go by truck. If Domino Sugar is shipping sugar up to H&S Bakery, they're going to be shipping it by truck, not by rail.
Domino Sugar?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think these rail lines are the main line from the port to the rest of the economy. As Jim Dwyer, the Director of Planning, said at the last hearing, the Port of Baltimore is an economic engine for the state of Maryland and the city of Baltimore. 30% of the 13,000 plus direct jobs that are affiliated with the port directly are held by residents of the city of Baltimore. I myself am a resident of the city of Baltimore. And these jobs pay 16% above the statewide median average, and Maryland is one of the wealthiest states in the country, so that is a significant family supporting wage. So all of those things are sort of in the balance. And at the port, we like to say that the truck routes and the rail lines are like our arteries. If the Port of Baltimore is the heart of the regional economy and you cut off our arteries, the regional economy is going to suffer because that's where the freight moves. We can't have a healthy port without being able to move the freight in and out of the port.
Okay. One of the ground rules I have is please turn off your cell phones and smartphones and give courtesy to those who are going to testify. Anyone have questions?
I do.
We have Councilman Warren Branch just came in. Good evening, Councilman. So does anyone else? Councilwoman Clark? Go ahead. Use the microphone.
So, all right, so what are we talking about? We're talking about TransForm and a rezoning proposal, right?
Right, and I have maps that could clarify if I might pass them out.
Yes, please.
You go back to the microphone.
The maps I'm handing out, one is the truck route map that shows a little bit more of the context of where the trains are going. Some folks may not realize that the two main lines that go through this area, one is managed by CSX, and one is controlled by Norfolk Southern. And the larger context map shows where their rail lines are located. The other map, on the back of the other map is a list of the properties that we're most concerned about. These properties front or back, and in some cases both front and back, onto a major truck route or one or both of the rail lines.
And so what is, it's my fault, I missed what you said. What are they and what are they being zoned to?
They are currently zoned M1 or M2.
So that's industrial zoning.
Yes. The TransForm Baltimore proposed the properties, 90% of them to be I2. One of them to be
industrial
heavy, one to be industrial, light industrial, and one to be industrial mixed use, which is, these proposals were proposals that we supported because they helped buffer the existing residential areas from the main rail lines and the truck routes. The proposed amendment that we're opposing would amend these properties to C2, R8, and/or industrial mixed use, and those are delineated on the list, and that is what we're here to oppose.
So wait a minute. You're opposing, I'm sorry, say it again. It's a lot of,
It's okay.
What are you against?
We are opposed to rezoning 4401 Eastern Avenue from industrial mixed use to C2.
You don't want it to be C2.
Right.
That's commercial.
Yes. Commercial with residential.
Commercial with residential. What do you want it to be if you had your wishes?
Industrial mixed use is the appropriate use
And
for that
That's
property.
the planning's recommendation.
That is the planning department's
And
recommendation.
that's what you want.
Yes. And there, do you want me to read each part, each?
Many properties on their list.
Yeah. Should
I
I go
know.
through each one?
Sure.
There are a block of properties that are commonly known as Chesapeake Iron and Metal.
Oh, I know it well.
There are 4 parcels involved in that property. The planning department's recommendation was I2 because that reflects industrial two, which is heavy industrial. That was the planning department's recommendation because of the existing use of the property and because of its location. The proposed amendments would change that to C2, which is also high-density residential mixed-use commercial.
So what are you asking for?
I1 or I2?
Industrial 1 or industrial
Yes.
2?
And industrial 2.
Well, why? So you're here asking for a bunch of properties that are being zoned.
We are in favor of the way the planning department had them rezoned under TransForm.
You're supporting the planning department's amendments for those parcels.
Yes. We are opposing the council members' amendments for those properties.
Okay.
And there
why?
are 8 properties. Because allowing residential along the rail lines and the truck routes will effectively cut off our ability to ship freight in and out of the Port of Baltimore. That is the briefest way to say it.
But they're not going to build on the tracks.
They have, in the past, built within 50 feet of the tracks. If you go to the O'Donnell Square PUD and look at the crossing, I have a video, if I only have it on my iPad, but it shows the train going within 50 feet of brand new townhomes. So developers will build that close to the rail line. And this is the main rail line. I forgot to mention that this rail line is the only rail line that leads to the Howard Street Tunnel, which we are going to be investing millions of dollars expanding, so that the Port of Baltimore can remain competitive in a global marketplace.
Ask one more question. Okay, all right, so people are going to buy houses next to a railroad track, and you think it's going to hurt the port's the way the port gets served?
Yes, because once they move in, they realize that there are actually trains there. There are occasions where...
You mean the neighbors?
Yes.
They didn't know that?
I can't testify on their behalf, but it appears as though they did not know that.
They must
Or
have
they
had,
were
like,
told that the trains don't
Do a
run.
house tour at 4 a.m. Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I forgot where I was.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was my fault.
That's okay. Once residential starts to move in to the area, whether it's apartments
I
or
see.
townhomes, they start complaining about the noise and the dust and the trucks that are there 24/7.
I got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, no one else? I'd like to hear from the Maryland Motor Truck regards to the truck traffic that I see it in my district on Curtis Avenue in Pennington. So what effect would this have on, since that's a truck route? I wish we'd had somebody here from DOT.
We do. We do. We have
Okay,
Patrick
oh, okay,
Fleming.
all right, okay, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Reisner. Craig Talbot, Vice President with Maryland Motor Truck Association.
Lift up the mic, put it to, yeah, so we could hear you, go ahead.
All right. Hear me now?
Yeah.
Sound like a commercial? Okay.
Yeah, introduce
Yeah.
yourself.
Craig Talbot, Maryland Motor Truck Association, Vice President. The effect is hundreds of trucks daily, once that becomes a residential, because the folks are going to move in there residentially. They're not going to realize the noise that's created by the trucks. We represent about 1,100 members, trucking companies in the state of Maryland. Giant Food, Safeway, Rucker Terminal, and H&S Bakery, Northeast Foods. On Haven Street and Baltimore Street, H&S Bakery, or Northeast Foods, if you will, has a large processing plant there for the rolls. There are trucks in and out of there almost 24/7. They had complement their location down on Caroline Street and also up there on Moravia Park Drive up in the northeast section of town. Right now, that's a truck route. It's an authorized truck route through city planning. It's been approved. It's on the truck map right now. They come into Pulaski Highway, Route 40, if you will, come right down Haven Street, can go all the way down Haven Street. There's another company, Monumental Supply, the rail yards for Norfolk Southern, CSX, Rucker Terminals, all the way down at the end, down by Boston Street. It's a truck route. It's many, many trucks on there. And our fear is, along with the port, that's going to be closed down. It's going to be prohibited for trucks to go on there if a residential area is put up into there, into that location. I'm not going to rehash everything that the lady from the port, she did an excellent job of describing the traffic there. This traffic is also going to would be compounded if you're not going to be able to be on the residential areas that were planned on Haven Street, O'Donnell, Eastern, up in that area. You're going to lose down into Curtis Bay some of the movements, especially with the intermodal freight and the warehousing that's all contingent in that area upon the truck routes to move efficiently. We've got a large yard, Pie Corp, off of Lombard Street that also utilizes Haven Street and to get over to their location, just I guess northeast of the Johns Hopkins Hospital. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, right now, because your office used to be in Mall Park where I lived at, and you guys.
Yes, sir.
Okay, but regards to some of your members, I mean, they have a GPS to tell them which way they should go, but some of them still go through residential neighborhoods, and that's what we don't want. So,
Right.
So I'm not trying to to lead you in anything, but if this was to pass, what effect would that have? Would we see more trucks going through residential neighborhoods?
I think you would, because a lot of the trucks that are operated by drivers that are not familiar with this area, they're from out of state, out of the area, completely foreign. GPS is a wonderful system if you have a car, but for most trucks, it's not going to tell you about low overhead bridges, restricted roads, restricted bridges, that type of information. And it's very scant for trucking.
Okay. Anyone have? No? Yeah, go ahead, Councilman Costello.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to point out, in representing one of the districts that the port resides in, just the significance of the economic activity in the port. In terms of the entire metropolitan region, we probably output about $180 billion of economic activity annually, and about a third of that comes from the Port of Baltimore alone. So I would just respectfully request that you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee be sensitive to that when the committee is reviewing this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to hear, I mean, because last week we didn't have the testimony, but I'm getting emails. The Maryland pilots, anybody here from the Maryland pilots that want to testify? You good? Okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Jeff Fraley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to answer any question that you may have about the corridor and our opposition to Councilman Kraft's amendments. I feel like I'm almost an expert in this field over the last 2 weeks, so please fire away with any concern. I'd first like to start out with the obvious. One of these proposed developments is dead in the middle of 2 rail routes with nothing else there. You've got a Norfolk Southern line, you got a CSX line, and you have industrial property in between. And to the west, where the CSX line is, immediately adjacent to that is Haven Street, the truck route. There's amendment now to have that property in between the railroad tracks rezoned for a developer to come in to be able to build mixed-use residential and commercial. I'm just pointing out the obvious mistakes that we can allow to happen if we were to pass these amendments as proposed. Now, you can ask me any questions you want. It was brought to my attention earlier that properties north of O'Donnell Street should be redeveloped into residential because it makes sense. Well, it doesn't make sense to me, and it doesn't make sense to the Port of Baltimore, because below these properties and above these properties, or north and south, are major railroads, major rail spurs, major industrial businesses, and one hell of a freight route that we cannot afford to jeopardize. So unless anybody can explain the practicality to me of building townhomes or mixed-use development in between 2 major freight lines that have been here since the 1700s, I'm all ears.
Councilman Henry?
I can't answer that, but since you paused, I was going to take the opportunity to ask a question.
Thank you.
Okay. We're hampered a little bit in, I think, the most productive discussion of this by not having Councilman Kraft here as both the sponsor of the amendment and here's the key part, the person who represents that district, all the people and property owners there. I'm not as familiar with this area. How close is the closest existing residential neighborhood to the piece of property that is being dealt with in this amendment?
Jill said 50 feet. I think it's more about 30 feet, and we can play a video for you.
That's I mean the existing, like an existing residential neighborhood. There's already one right there.
Is it Brewers Hill?
So the rail line to the east of this site has an at-grade crossing at Fate, and it was the crossing to get into Crown Court Concealed property, which I might add has 20-plus businesses there right now. It's not vacant, nor is Cambridge Iron, the property in question. And about 30 to 50 feet east of that rail line, that at-grade rail line, there are 3-story residential units, 3-story townhomes.
Okay. So has has either your group as a group or have members of your group interacted with those communities?
Yes.
And where are they on this issue?
Well, when they come out of the house to talk to you, typically their eyes are red from train whistles blowing all night and no sleep. As my colleague Brian Hammock can explain to you, because he's actually the legislative affairs representative for CSX in the Mid-Atlantic region, he goes out and puts out all these fires. And I'm sure Councilman Kraft could tell you the same. Councilman Henry knows a lot about, Councilman Cole knows a lot about it over in District 10 prior to Councilman Costello, because as Silo Point went up,
Yeah.
Councilman Cole was faced with the phone calls. And you ask about, Mary Pat, you ask, or Councilwoman Clark, you ask about the obvious and people moving into these neighborhoods where rail lines are. I took a tour of Silo Point when it was a new place to be, and a realtor told me that they were doing away with those railroads. Oh my God. Yeah. So I was really looking hard to spend over $500,000 to live on top of a locking rail system 24 hours a day. And those fancy bells and whistles you hear at night, oh, they're going to go away also. So you can't blame it on the homeowner. Of course, they're about 99% at fault here for not opening their eyes, but they're moving in. They're taking residence, and the only thing they can do once they move in, because they're locked, is to complain to you guys, which
And then
thus negatively impacts our business.
And then try to encourage further restriction of the industrial.
It's a slippery
moving forward.
slope. What you have here is a perfect, as I like to describe, a mechanical chase for freight in and out of the Port of Baltimore. If we bottleneck it right here, who knows what the long-term effect is. But I can tell you this, the real jobs in this city are made right there on that dock. And it's our obligation to protect them. So, and as far as Councilman Reisinger, as far as flooding into other districts, just imagine the precedent this will set for our district down in District 11. I can hear it now. You know, I can't even imagine if we're allowed to build so irresponsibly in between, I'm sorry, District 10.
He means 10.
In our district. I can't imagine, you know, the precedent that would be able to be looked at when they're considering, you know, building adjacent to the freight routes in Curtis Bay and Fairfield.
Okay. Anyone else? No? You got something to add, and we're going to move on.
In response,
You want to use the microphone and introduce yourself again?
Jill Lemke with the Maryland Port Administration again. In response to Councilman Henry's question about whether or not we'd reached out to some of the residential communities around this area, which includes Highlandtown and Canton and those areas. And I did have a conversation with the Southeast CDC, and in the book of comments, the book of comments and amendments, the Southeast CDC has expressed opposition to changing the zoning proposed for that Crown Cork and Seal property, which is in between the two major rail lines from IMU to C2, and states that the IMU is the most appropriate use for that parcel. IMU does allow a certain amount of residential, which in full disclosure, I used to work for the planning department and have been involved in TransForm Baltimore for a number of years. So having met with them in my prior life, the plan was to do the residential along Eastern Avenue, which is somewhat buffered by the rail lines because they're elevated at that point. But we have reached out to the community, and I think there is agreement that we should not repeat the same mistake that we made in O'Donnell Square.
Okay, yeah. Patrick Fleming from DOT, you want to? I know you've been here since 12 o'clock. My question is that, DOT, what's her name, did the traffic study for the whole city. Valerie, yeah. And she came into my district, and she did a traffic study of the whole city.
Right.
So what does that, during that traffic study, where does that come in with this on Haven Street? Yeah, truck study.
The study to look at establishing truck routes throughout the city of Baltimore, officially designating truck routes. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure how The new zoning will overlay exactly with the existing truck routes. I do believe that that from what it appears that they're talking about, I'm not overly familiar with the amendment. I apologize because I did come late to this whole process. But it sounds like it would potentially create a zoning layer or a zoning district in an area that would create a new residential neighborhood in an already heavy industrial area, which is served, which is already a truck route, has a lot of railroad operations. So it appears that it would create new opportunities for residents to put residences in areas that would conflict with truck and heavy uses.
Okay. Any questions from committee? Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to speak?
I'd like to make one more point, Mr. Chairman, if I can. I'm also a CDL truck driver, and I'll tell you from experience, truck drivers are a lot like water. We flow to the path of least resistance. If we lock up Haven Street, you better believe there's going to be a large amount of trucks in the neighborhoods of Butcher Hill and Canton, thus resulting in phone calls to you guys, more restriction on our work, negatively impacting the port and the industrial communities. Adios to the jobs.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, yes.
My name's Harry Halpert. I represent MTC Logistics. We're located right now by the Seagirt Marine Terminal, but I'm only 50, or about to be 50, and since 1984, I've worked in Highlandtown. That's where our first warehouse was. Actually, second warehouse. We were speaking a bit earlier about that transportation line along Haven Street. People know that. I mean, I've driven up and down that road ever since I was 16 years old, knowing that that's the truck route. All of the business, or a lot of the business we're doing right now, leaves from around Boston Street, heads right up Haven Street. And the other point regarding jobs, the folks that come to work for us, they all live in those neighborhoods. I mean, they'll walk to work in the wintertime. So I just hate to see the roads closed down to trucks because it's going to impact jobs. Thank you.
All right, anyone else before we conclude? Okay, this concludes the work session. Again, our next TransForm Baltimore hearing is scheduled for October the 13th at 5 p.m. in the City Council chambers. Thank you. What? I want to thank everyone for attending this hearing. Please check the area around your seat to make certain that you have everything that you brought with you. Thank you.